Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My wife, who's sitting in the front row here, tells me that I'm too dark when I talk about the ocean, that I depress my audiences rather than lift them towards action. But I think it would not be faithful of me if I didn't first of all say how dire the situation is, and then I'll try and talk for the second half of this address about what we can be doing and the good stuff that is happening. So let's take it from the top. And I think the best way to take it from the top is to go back to Madrid, the climate COP, which was held there in December. And as I'm sure those of you who follow the climate discussions since the Paris Agreement, it wasn't a particularly good outcome from Madrid. Countries were still arguing the toss instead of saving the world. And at the Blue COP, as we called it, because we put a lot of ocean work into the Madrid COP, the Secretary-General of the United Nations said this. And this was not a man sitting on a soapbox at Hyde Park in London. It wasn't a head of government. You know, governments come and governments go, but the United Nations remains. And this was the Secretary-General of the United Nations representing all of us. And he said that we are knowingly destroying the life support systems of this planet. Knowingly destroying. And what did he base that on? He based that on the 4 big reports that were produced, the scientific reports that were produced last year, 3 by the IPCC and 1 by IPBES, which basically gave the consensus of the best of our Earth scientists in the world about what is the state of the environment. You know, looking at detailed things like what happens to the world if we have 1.5 degrees warming above the pre-industrial age compared with 2 degrees. They did a whole report on that, the difference of 0.5 degrees. And based on those 4 reports of the best of our Earth scientists, Secretary-General Guterres said to everybody, you are knowingly destroying, we are knowingly destroying the life support systems of this planet. You know, it's just incredible that we've got to this stage in human civilization that the Secretary-General of the United Nations says that. So what do we see in terms of the ocean to support that position? Well, you all see the pollution, the ocean pollution. You've all seen the plastic, the 5 great gyres out there in the ocean. You all know that that plastic is now breaking down from your clothing and all the rest into microfibers. You all know by now, surely, that you're ingesting it in your moule, in your oysters, in your fish, that you're eating plastic. You know all that stuff. And yet, we still see the plastic bottles on every street of every city in the world. Again, the Secretary-General last week, in his Twitter, I saw that he said, let us now have a global ban on single-use plastics. Again, this is not a politician who's worried about he's going to get elected at the next elections. This is the Secretary-General of the United Nations calling for a global ban on single-use plastic. Let's get serious. Countries are doing it bit by bit, but it's time that everybody ban this plague that has been put upon the planet and upon our ocean, the plastic plague. I'm old enough to remember a world where there was no plastic, folks, and it was perfectly all right. So don't be greenwashed or hoodwinked into thinking that we must have plastic, because that's false. Then you've all heard about the fishing situation. 1/3 of the wild stock of our oceans are being overfished. In other words, they're being fished towards extinction. Then about 60% is being fished to the absolute biological limit. So this, some would say, shows good management. But the picture that I want to leave with you is the fact that fishing per se, chasing finfish, is not the future of mankind. That's because the ocean's health is declining, and also because those fish stocks are declining. But the future of fisheries remains strong. Not fisheries, I mean of marine produce to feed us remains strong, and I'll say a bit about that. But people ask me, what can you do to help this situation with the overfishing that we have? Well, every individual is a citizen, every individual has a member of parliament, and if you're not writing to your member of parliament and demanding that your member of parliament does something to stop illegal fishing, there's over $20 billion worth of illegal fish caught every year coming onto the market. You've been receiving stolen goods in your life for sure in the form of fish. So demanding an end to IUU fishing, and that $20 billion should be spent on helping coastal communities adapt. Stop the $20 billion worth of public funds that are given to the big industrial fleets to go out there and chase those diminishing stocks of wild fish, because they're using those subsidies to pay for their fuel to go out in the high seas and often, may I say, steal fish from other countries, from other communities, from indigenous communities, and from nature itself, because we can't manage the fish stocks out there if this illegal element is being taken out every year to such a great extent. So demand from your MPs, your governments, that they stop those subsidies. And the WTO, which as we all know is not going anywhere fast, but on the fisheries subsidies it can go fast. Removal of harmful fisheries subsidies. So your governments are the ones that will determine that, and put the pressure on them, please. So that's fisheries and that's pollution. And the picture's not nice for the ocean, but I'm hopeful on both those scores that by 2030 we can turn that around. I mean, marine pollution, that's a man management problem. Fisheries management, that's a man management problem. We ought to be able to sort that. That's within our powers to do that. But that's actually not the main threat to the health of the ocean. The main threat to the health of the ocean comes from the common enemy of mankind, which is our own behavior, which is our production of greenhouse gas emissions. That is the common enemy, not just of the ocean, but of nature as a whole and of our existence. And those greenhouse gas emissions, what are they doing to the ocean? They are causing the ocean to be more acidic. And this is a trend which has been observable since the beginning of the industrial age. Acidic to the point now where if you go to any shellfish industry anywhere in the world and say, what is your main problem? They will tell you it is ocean acidification. In other words, that calcium carbonate-based life forms like shellfish are finding it more and more difficult to live in the ocean because it's getting so much more acidic. Secondly, those GHG emissions are causing there to be less and less oxygen in the water. Read the IUCN report that was put out in January to coincide with the December to coincide with the Madrid COP. You'll find it online, IUCN deoxygenation. And you will see again that since the beginning of the industrial age, the ocean has been steadily losing oxygen. And that's just a scientific fact. And like the acidification, instead of going on a graph like this, it's going on a graph like that. So obviously less oxygen in the ocean, harder for life to exist. But the third one is probably the most pernicious, and coming from the South Pacific as I do, we're so aware of this and have been fighting this battle for many decades now. Because of the ocean warming, again, the GHG emissions, the greenhouse gas, the heat-trapping gases are causing the ocean to get hotter and hotter. And that's a big problem for us. That is, you know, in Fiji we're okay, we've got volcanic islands. But our neighbors, Tuvalu, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, these are flat atoll republics. They got nowhere to go. When the sea level comes up, they're drowning. But it's not just that. It's the fact that life is moving away from these hot waters in the tropics. Life is moving polewards. You may say that's nice for you guys in France or if you live in Sweden or somewhere. But in fact, it's not nice for you either, because your traditional species are going to be replaced by stronger tropical species that are coming in. So that change is underway. It's observable all around the world. And that's a result, again, bring it back to our behavior, driving the cars which you see outside the street here, and a lot of other things, creating those GHG emissions, causing the warming, causing the sea level to rise, because H2O expands once it gets hotter. The warming of the ocean is also doing something which I want to say to you, if you haven't thought about it, which is that the fate of the human species is probably directly linked to the fate of coral. And that's not a particularly rosy fate at the moment. Why? Coral is dying because of the heating of the ocean, and secondly, because of acidification. There are other factors, but those are the main two. So here's the predicament for us. The predicament is that the IPCC says that in that report that I referred to, the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees, that one of the big differences is that coral is basically gone. Coral reefs are basically gone once we go over the dreaded line of 2 degrees warming. You know, for us in the Pacific, that's unthinkable. You know, the ocean's biodiversity, 30% of it resides in coral reefs. What is the ocean's health going to be like with 30% of the biodiversity taken out of it? Answer, we don't know actually at this stage, but it can't be good. And if the ocean's ecosystem is not healthy, there cannot be a healthy planetary ecosystem. Lay down misere. That is just not possible for human beings to be living in a planetary ecosystem that is healthy if the ocean is dying. So here's the predicament. I haven't got to it yet. The predicament is that we're not heading to a 2 degrees, that dreaded line. Under current greenhouse gas emission paths, we are clearly heading to over 3.5 degrees before the end of this century. Okay? That's the predicament. So let's start talking about what we're doing about this. Obviously, we've known about it for a while. In the UN system, there are a lot of things happening in terms of the ocean. The UN Ocean Conference, those of you that were part of this, in 2017, this was when ocean action really started, in 2017 at the UN Ocean Conference, where people from all around the world got together and said, we're in trouble, we've got to start doing something. So in the last 3 years, you've seen massive wakening up all around the world. Every country, I'm in a different country twice a week, and every country I go to, from Asia to Africa to South America, people are into ocean action. So we're having the second UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon, 2nd to 6th of June this year, and member states of the United Nations, in their wisdom, gave that the theme of scaling up ocean action based upon science and innovation. So there's a heavy innovation and science effort going on now in the international community. And that leads on to a second thing that the United Nations General Assembly has mandated, which is the UN Decade of Ocean Science, which will run from 21 to 2030. Now, why is that important? It's important because it's estimated that we only know about 5% of the science of the ocean at the moment. Only 5%. We don't know on the seafloor, we haven't mapped it. We don't know what the biome is yet. Every time you put a bucket down into the deep sea and pull it up, there's a new life form in there. There's so much for us to learn from the ocean. It has so much to give, and we must study it so that we can make the very important decisions which we're going to have to make as a species in consensus by about 2030 about things like, you know, perhaps geoengineering. Who knows where we've got to by 2030. But at least we'll have the good science on the most important part of this planet, which is the ocean. Most important because that's where most life on the planet resides. There's also a very important meeting coming up in Lisbon on the 1st of June, which is called the Sustainable Blue Economy Investment Forum. Now, why is that important? It's because a lot of people talk about blue economy, going to be our future and all the rest. If it's just the blue economy, I'm not interested. I'm off this stage because I don't want to be part of another round of rape and pillage of finite planetary resources. I want to be part of a future where we're in a circular economy and where the sustainable blue economy feeds us, gives us our medicine, gives us our energy, all of which it can do if we look after it properly. And that, folks, is what we're doing at the United Nations. We are in what is called the super year. We've been waiting for this year for a long time. We mustn't waste it. It started off in Davos, where I've been going to Davos for about 4 years now. And the one thing I can report to, well, I'll report two things to you from, was it last week, I think? Firstly is that I, for the first time, had this sense of palpable urgency from the world's CEOs and the leaders that went there, perhaps not from the President of the United States, but who was speaking, but but from most people there. There's palpable sense of urgency that we are facing this global crisis now, and that we've got to fix it, and fix it fast. Second thing is that I've been in a group involved in the shipping industry and converting that dreadful bunker fuel which drives the global shipping fleet, bunker fuel, the dirtiest kind of oil, that's what ships go along on, to ammonium hydrogen, which is pollution-free, carbon-free, right? Now, this has always been a dream, and we've talked about it, and we've talked about it, and we've talked about it. But in Davos this year, with the oil companies present, shipping companies present, IMO present at the highest level, they said, we're ready to move on this now. So I left that with a sense of, my God, this is what it felt like 100 years ago when people said, sorry guys, those horses have got to go. Saddle makers, no, we don't need you anymore. We are moving from horses to motor cars. We, with the shipping industry, which carries 95% of our trade, are on the cusp of that great move from a highly polluting industry to one with virtually zero pollution. So watch that space and support it if you can. So that's the start of the super year. The next big thing, as I mentioned, is the Lisbon conference on the ocean, to keep the world's feet to the fire on SDG 14, the UN's goal to conserve and sustainably use the ocean's resources, which covers everything from marine pollution to illegal fishing to ocean science to better ecosystem management to marine protected areas. All those things I've been talking about are all captured in SDG 14. So this is the conference where we keep the world's feet to the fire, because all of the governments will be there at the highest level, all the NGOs will be there, and all of the business houses that care about the sustainable blue economy will be there. That's the next one. Next big one's in France, in Marseille, the IUCN Ministerial Congress. This happens every 4 years or so, and this is a very important environmental moment. Why are these conferences important? Because at each stage we're ratcheting things up. At the moment, I'm in Paris not to address this summit. I convened a meeting yesterday of everybody who's involved in trying to get us to 10% of the ocean into marine protected areas by 2020. We're in 2020 now. So we've got like 4 months to get that job done before Lisbon. Looking good. But the next conference, like Marseille, for example, and Lisbon, we will be saying 10 by 20 is not enough. We need 30% of the world's ocean into marine protected areas by 2030. So we've had 10 by 20, we're moving to 30 by 30. Now you can only make those big moves when you get everybody together in a totally international binding consensus situation. So that's why we have to have these gatherings of humanity occasionally. I should also mention the biodiversity COP in Kunming. Hopefully this pandemic will be under control by then. And that also is part of this super year, pushing us towards a final destination. And the final destination is Glasgow in November. Glasgow in November is where, under the Paris Agreement, that in 2020, parties to the Paris Agreement have got to come along with greatly enhanced nationally determined contributions. In other words, what that means is, I'm currently saying that, look, I'm going to cut my greenhouse gases by 10%. Well, I got to come along to Glasgow and say 50% or something like that. You know, it's got to be exponential what you come to Glasgow with. In Davos, I put it to the plastic industry, who were gathered like this, and said, you guys, the plastic industry, enough with the talk. Come to Glasgow and show the world, make a voluntary commitment as an industry that you are aligning with the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees ceiling. So that's why Glasgow is so important, because if we succeed in Glasgow and get that greatly enhanced ambition that everybody's looking for, we will indeed have turned the corner towards a track which will take us through the decade that we see ahead, the decade of action. Science tells us we've only got 10 years to fix this, so that by 2030 we will have the solutions. So in Glasgow, we will know whether we have turned onto that track or whether we are still tottering towards that precipice. So I'm confident that, humanity, we lean in the direction of survival. And to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I would say that, as a student of history, when I look at how humanity has progressed from the Stone Age through to the Space Age, that we have had two great strengths as a species. The first strength is our power of innovation. That's what took us from stone to copper and steel and everything that got us up to the moon. Innovation, incredible power of the human species. And the second one is our ability to share. That's the basis of civilization and society. And I have found through history that the time of intensified innovation and intensified sharing, better sharing of resources and ideas, is actually during wartime, funnily enough. You think of radar, think of rockets, think of wartime economies. And so why, in the greatest challenge that Homo sapiens has ever faced, which is the climate challenge of the 21st century, would we not be exercising our two greatest strengths, which is innovation and better sharing? And I firmly believe we will be doing that. We'll do it this year, but we're going to put that into practice over the next decade. And as a grandfather, I'm full of hope that my grandchildren will, in fact, be able to flourish on planet Earth, but only if we all do our bit. So write your MPs, folks, and thanks for listening.